So, Tool Time made a response video to some guy I don't even really know and I don't even particularly care. This guy was criticizing Tool Time for drawing attention to white privilege while not drawing attention to the idea of human privileges. Now, Peter rightfully dismissed this criticism as myopic. You can't address every single social injustice all at the same time. You have to pick your battles, stay on message, and try to do what you can. At the same time, however, Peter made a number of offhand remarks which frankly reek of intellectual laziness. He parades a series of sophomoric excuses and weak-minded talking points to actually avoid having to deal with a sincere moral challenge to the way he chooses to live his life.
Secular justification. What is the lion's justification for taking down a gazelle? It's an animal, and life feeds on life.
How do you justify eating meat? Is it because they're
Life
less
feeds
intelligent
on
than you?
life.
In case you don't recognize it, that phrase, life feeds on life, comes from a song by Tool called Disgustipated. If you don't know the song, it opens with a sermon of sorts, in which Maynard, in the guise of a preacher, speaks about the tortured cries of the carrots, because tomorrow is the harvest, and to them it is the Holocaust. Then it goes into the song, the body of the song that is, where Maynard chants, "This is necessary, life feeds on life." Now, I love Tool. They're one of my favorite bands of all time, and I assume Peter loves them too, both since he referenced their lyric and because it seems to be his YouTube user namesake. But this line is just idiotic, and I'm sorely disappointed in Tool for writing it, and I'm equally disappointed in Peter for quoting it approvingly. A mere moment of reflection should make it obvious why this is the case. If we took life feeds on life as an ethic for food choices, that would license cannibalism. Human beings are life too. So if Peter's comfortable with the idea that life feeds on life, if that's an adequate justification or an adequate way for thinking about how we should make food choices, then he can't complain when I kill him and roast his corpse over an open spit. The simple-mindedness of life feeds on life ignores obvious, real, and morally significant differences between kinds of life. Contrary to what Maynard says in that song, carrots do not have consciousness. They feel no pain, and they are not aware of their surroundings. They have no interests. Cows, chickens, and pigs, by contrast, do have consciousness. They do feel pain, and they are aware of their surroundings. They do have interests. And if anyone's tempted to say, well, how can you be sure? Fucking spare me, please. That's the worst kind of sophomoric tripe that leads to philosophy majors getting the shit kicked out of them. Not only does our common sense indicate that animals feel pain and plants do not, science does too. Neuroscience, ethology, psychology, even fields like economics, just the brain and behavioral sciences in general. As well as, of course, the plant sciences, botany and all its sub-branches. To name but one of many, many volumes on this topic, check out Charles Darwin's The Expression of the Emotions in Man and Other Animals. We have known that animals feel pain and plants do not, on a scientific basis for over 100 years, and on a folk psychology basis for over 1,000. And only pedantic sophistry can deny this. Animals feel pain, ergo they matter morally. Plants do not, ergo they do not matter morally.
I think a lot of this has to do with factory farming and the pollution and the way that animals are treated because of what it takes to deal with a mass herd of animals. For most of human history, you would pretty much be doing whatever it took to survive, including eating animals. I think it's only now in first world countries where we have grocery stores and niche markets of food manufacturing catering to people like vegans, in which people now have the luxury to eat vegan, and they try and turn this into a moral decision, whereas, for the rest of human history, you did it to survive.
But we're not living in most of human history. We're living now. We get to choose between eating in a way that avoids, or at least minimizes, needless suffering, or eating in a way that causes the most obscene and grotesque amounts of suffering this planet has ever seen. To say that this isn't a moral issue because it wasn't an option in earlier points in history is just plain idiotic. You could justify all sorts of atrocities this way. Historically speaking, most human civilizations relied crucially on slave labor. Do we want to say it's only now that we have the luxury of rejecting slavery that people are trying to turn slavery into a moral issue, whereas for the rest of human history, you did it to survive? Are we really willing to accept that kind of thinking as a justification for slavery today, or as an excuse to stop treating slavery like it is a serious moral issue that deserves our attention?
Could we get by without eating meat? Yes, but that assumes numerous things about societal infrastructure and about the nature of society overall.
No, it only assumes that you are a person who is capable of making decisions for yourself. Neither you or I, Peter, have the power to single-handedly reorganize society's food infrastructure. What we do have is the power to refuse to participate in an industry that causes more suffering than all other human activity on the planet combined. Stop using the excuse of conformity. Well, if society changed the way it produces food, I'd change the way I eat. That's bad faith, and you know it.
You have to have a fairly large and elaborate society, which inevitably creates waste one way or the other. Factory farming is just another example of how human society on a mass scale creates waste. And in order to have this vegan lifestyle, which a lot of people want to pursue, while it doesn't necessarily involve meat, and hopefully in their ideals it doesn't involve meat and the mistreatment of animals at all, it still requires a very similar infrastructure that will invariably create waste.
Again, this is pathetically disingenuous. Yes, waste is inevitable in all civilizations, but it hardly follows from that that all forms of civilization or all forms of food production are equally wasteful. Factory farming is possibly the most wasteful, most polluting industry in the history of the world. If you took even a preliminary glance at the agronomical data, you would know that even an industrial vegetarian food system, while still wasteful and polluting, is nowhere near as bad as an industrial meat-based system.
Really, unless you are personally planting all of your own food and growing all of your own food yourself, then you're just as much, you're relying on a different system, and it may not directly involve animals, but you're just as guilty of relying on the system as everybody else. The world sucks in that way. I'm not going to say that it's right just because that's the way it is, but I think that it should be pointed out that it's not as simple of a matter of well, I choose to behave this way and you choose to behave that way, therefore I'm right and you're wrong. The world just isn't that simple.
Yeah, there's no magic bullet, no morally faultless lifestyle. The world is a morally complicated place, I agree completely. But that's not an excuse for refusing to make decisions that obviously improve the world. Nor is it an excuse for refusing to be party to systems that obviously make the world a worse place, when we can, with fairly little effort on our part, avoid doing so.
This is another thing, attempting to make moral arguments on the basis of arbitrary goalposts. So his complaint is that people say, well, we're smarter than animals, or animals don't have consciousness, therefore we have the right to kill them. Well, he's just creating his own moral goalpost and saying, well, they can suffer. Or maybe he doesn't believe this, but this is what I can gather from general sort of vegetarian and vegan arguments. Animals can suffer and plants cannot. Therefore, we have a moral obligation to not eat animals, and we don't have the same moral obligation to plants. Intelligence is a goalpost. Suffering is another goalpost. It's just swapping the same moral reasoning.
It's not his goalpost, Peter. It's your goalpost. It's everyone's goalpost, except for the sociopath. Are you seriously going to tell me that you don't think capacity to feel pain matters? It's just an arbitrary line, no different than the race line, or the gender line, or the intelligence line, or the species line. You really want to say that? This is something that every Animal Ethics 101 student covers when they talk about Peter Singer's All Animals Are Equal. Sentience is a prerequisite for having interests. If X can't feel pleasure and pain, then nothing we do to X can adversely affect X in any way. So there's no need to take X into consideration. By contrast, if X can feel pleasure and pain, then it does matter morally, and there's no justification for not taking it into account. This is why it's morally permissible to kick a rock, but not morally permissible to kick a puppy. There's nothing arbitrary about that. You agree with this, Peter. I know you do. I mean, sure, Singer's argument isn't logically bulletproof, but you can't honestly reject it. You can point out to the fact that it's not going to sway the sociopath, but that doesn't matter unless you're a sociopath. The only way we can avoid this is if we're being horribly dishonest with ourselves. We have to admit that it sways us. It speaks to us. It speaks to the things that we think matter morally. Unless you're going to tell me that you really don't think that pain matters morally, that gratuitous, ridiculous suffering is something that has no moral significance to you, then Singer's argument resonates. And it's very frustrating to me that someone as intelligent as you, Peter, someone who is obviously well-read in philosophy in general, would claim to speak knowledgeably on a topic such as this without reading or at least acknowledging the basic literature on the subject. Now please, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to come across as holier than thou. I have no delusions that I'm a morally flawless person. A lot of my decisions contribute to needless suffering too. I could certainly be living better. I'm the first to admit that. I'm in no position to throw stones or cast judgment at anyone else's character or moral choices. At the same time, however, I do think that we need to be honest with ourselves about the nature of those choices. When people start appealing to excuses like life feeds on life, that shuts down basic critical thinking. When they start saying things like, this is the way it's been done for all of history, that's a way of avoiding dealing with an actual moral problem. People aren't being honest with themselves when they think that way. They're not being honest about the decisions that they make and the impact that those decisions have on themselves, on others, and on the planet as a whole. Because evil feeds on ignorance. And whatever you think about ethics, animals, and food, no one is better off when they stick their head in the sand.